Steve Hetherington will be giving our next lesson. And he and his wife live in DeSoto.
No.
Lancaster, I'm sorry. Lancaster. I was close. And he attends the Hahn Freeway Church of Christ. And he's no stranger to us. He's filled in for me in the past and will probably be filling in for me in August when we go on our vacation. I already talked to him about that. You remember?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, he's going to be giving us a lesson next, so we appreciate him coming out and being able to teach us.
All right, I'm going to do the same kind of format that Sean did. This is really like a class setting, so more, like a dialogue would be fine. I don't want it to be like I don't want y'all to be under the impression that it's like a lecture and you need to, just sit back and take it. I'll let Sean treat you like that on Sundays, So, anyways, just to get right to it, turn over to 1 Timothy 4. I know Sean dealt with this text, and I just want to use this as a basis for what we're going to be talking about. Sean did a lot of, I'll tell you, that was good. That was interesting. Those Greek words, brother, that you were talking about, that's some good stuff. I learned some pretty good information about that. And by the way, the word Stephanos, that's where my name comes from, Stephen. It's from the Greek word Stephanos. Yes, I'm the crown. That's right. Special. But now that's true. That's where the word Stephen comes from, is Stephanos. As a matter of fact, that might be interesting to even look at Stephen's name in Acts 7 and see if that's what that word is in the Greek. Anyways. In 1 Timothy 4, like we said, Sean was talking about these things already. But I want to start in verse 6, just to grab a little context here, and we're going to work up through 9. Verse 9. It says in verse 6, "If you instruct the brethren in these things, you will be a good minister of Jesus Christ, nourished in the words of faith, and of the good doctrine which you have carefully followed. But reject profane and old wives' fables, and exercise yourself toward godliness, for bodily exercise profits a little, but godliness is profitable for all things, having promise of the life that now is, and of that which is to come. This is a faithful saying, and worthy of all acceptance." In this context, Paul makes it very clear when he's writing to Timothy. He talks about the behavior that we're supposed to have toward godliness. He describes it as exercise. And I think he said, what was the word in the Greek? Gymnasio or something like that? Somewhere along those lines. Exercise is what he's saying. You exercise yourself toward godliness. And he says, he makes a comparison. He said, bodily exercise profits a little. Notice, he doesn't say it doesn't profit at all. He said bodily exercise does profit you, but in comparison to godliness, it's a little. Godliness is profitable for all things, having promise of this life now and of the one that's to come. And what I want us to look at today is, like Sean gave us a good technical study of those words that he was talking about in his lesson. I want us to kind of take a different angle. The idea we're going to look at here is we're going to look at some more of a practical approach as to this comparison of the spiritual endeavor that we're supposed to take and how that compares to the physical realm, and in particular exercise. And I'll say, let's see, this summer, this is 2008, I started exercising in the summer of 1994. So in the realm of physical exercise and weight training and all that, I've been involved in this for about 14 years now. So I can tell you some things that I know from personal experience about how the body reacts to training, the kind of things that hurt it, the kind of things that help it. And what's really neat is when I became a Christian, let's see, that was 7 years ago. 7 years. That's been a while, huh? 7 years ago, when I became a Christian, I started learning more about how the Bible, when I started discovering how the Bible describes the soul and the spirit and all the kind of things that can hurt the spirit and the kind of things that help the spirit. And then these comparisons that we read in 1 Timothy 4 here about exercising and how he compares it to racing and running in 1 Corinthians 9. it kind of struck me. I was like, wow, there is really a very, very close parallel between the physical body and the soul. And I think that's one of the, I think God intended that when He designed this physical world for it to be somewhat similar to the spiritual world. So when we understand the things of the physical realm, we can parallel it. That's why Jesus many times taught in parables, because He knew that there were things in this realm that compared to spiritual things. And I think the physical body, in very many ways, compares with the soul. And what I want us to look at today is a few things that parallel in the physical body, from the physical body to the soul. So if you're taking notes, I have several points here, and I want to stay on any particular one too long. But I want to just look at these concepts. I want us to think about them in our mind and say and try to draw the parallel here and say, yeah, I see how that works, because when we look at these things in the physical body, we know they're true. And I want us to see how in the Bible it's the same way. And of course, not every last little respect is going to be exactly parallel. Understand that as well. So there's a few things I want to look at here as far as some principles that we can incorporate into our spiritual life that people already do in this life to their physical bodies to help them grow. Because, and I'm going to be looking at from the approach of a person who likes to be a bodybuilder, let's say. The bodybuilder's goal is to shape his physique and to get it to the point where it's to the point of perfection. To where, he has as much symmetry as he can, proper proportion amongst his muscle and development and all that. And it's he wants that precision and that perfection of look. That's the goal of the bodybuilder. And it's a sport, it's a competition. Now, I will say this, just at the outset, I think it's very immodest how bodybuilders get up in front of a mixed assembly, a mixed crowd of people, and they're basically naked. I'm not saying, that part of the sport is good and okay. But the idea of building and taking care of one's body is totally scriptural. There's nothing wrong. As a matter of fact, I think the Bible teaches that we ought to take care of our bodies physically and not to abuse them and anything of that sort. So the first thing I want to look at is, and this is probably one of the core things in trying to build the body, is number one, you have to have and maintain a proper diet. You have to have the proper diet. Many trainers will tell you that if there's one thing you're going to do at all for your body, any one thing to try to help your body look better and be in better shape, just eat the right foods and eat the right proportions. And if you did that and didn't even train at all, weight train, you would have a bigger impact on your body than if you ate garbage and went to the gym every day. That's true. That's very true. Matter of fact, they said diet has about an 80% impact on how you appear. It's just simply because of the food you eat. I know many guys who they may go to the gym, they may be strong and all and pick up a lot of weight, but they have a big gut. And they really don't have much shape to them, but they can really jerk a lot of weight, but they don't eat the right foods. And for that reason, they're not a bodybuilder. But if the bodybuilder, you'll see one of the hardest things for them to do, and one of the most very important things for them to do, is to have the right diet. Matter of fact, they say pre-contest dieting, about 6 weeks out from a contest, is harder and much more difficult than the training they have to do in the gym. Because it requires, like you're saying, so much mental discipline. Because your cravings, your desires to eat certain foods are so strong. And to have to bridle them and hold them back and maintain that proper diet is extremely hard. But it has such a great impact. The Bible likewise teaches this concept for the soul. How important it is that the soul gets the proper diet. If you look over at 1 Peter chapter 2, I want you to look at a few passages here with me right quick. And then we'll move on to our next point. Because there's several of them I want to cover, and I want to spend, of course, the rest of the day on them. But 1 Peter 2, starting in verse 1, says there, therefore laying aside all malice, all deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and all evil speaking, as newborn babes, desire the pure milk of the word, that you may grow thereby, if indeed you have tasted that the Lord is gracious. The Bible teaches that we should desire the pure milk of the word. And in the context, he's not talking about pure milk as in like the fundamentals. What he's saying is the pureness of the word, like the unadulterated teaching of God's truth, not something that's been contaminated with error. But the pure milk of the word is what we need to desire. That way we can grow by it. If you want to grow spiritually, if you want to mature and have your soul get stronger and increase, you have to have the pureness of God's word. And that's what the Bible teaches that we must seek if we desire to grow. That's what that is what we are to desire in order to grow. That's what he says, that you may grow by it. Let's not lose faith in what the Bible says as far as what makes us saved. Romans 1:16, the gospel. These instructions in the New Testament today, that's what saves our soul. James 1:21, receive the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. The proper diet is extremely important because Jesus taught in Mark chapter 7, if you want to turn over there with me right quick, Mark chapter 7, a very, very important principle that I think is very good for us to keep in mind. Mark chapter 7, and look at verse 20. Mark 7 and verse 20. This is all in the proper diet. Mark 7 verse 20 says, and he said, speaking of Jesus, he said, what comes out of a man, that defiles a man. And look, for from within, out of the heart of men proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lewdness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile a man. In Proverbs 4 and verse 23, I believe it is, where it says, keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it spring forth the issues of life. The diet that you put in your body is going to determine how your body eventually comes out and looks and appears. Likewise with the soul, whatever you put into your mind, that's what your soul is going to turn out to be like. When you pump your head full of garbage and filth that's out there in the world, guess what's going to happen to the soul? When you feed it a bunch of sinful behavior, things that are of an abominable nature and just downright inappropriate, guess what happens to the soul? It's going to be fat. It's going to have a big gut, so to speak. It's going to be out of shape and good for nothing. That's why, just like the body, the soul needs the proper diet. And you have to, and God has given us the nutrition we need. It's called His Word, the New Testament. We need to focus on that. We need to make sure that is the main thing we put into our minds. Because don't forget what Jesus said. It's out of our heart, out of the mind of man. That's what springs forth, evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications. How do those things get in there? Because we let them come in. And then we turn around and meditate on those things. And guess what starts happening? That's why Paul said in Philippians 4:8, meditate on these things, whatever is true, noble, just, pure, lovely, so forth. That's what we need to focus on. That needs to be our proper diet. Number two, in order for the bodybuilder to grow and to obtain that level of perfection he's seeking, every trained and successful bodybuilder will understand that, and everyone knows this, no pain, no gain. No pain, no gain. And I can tell you right now, there have been many times when I've gone through some very, very strenuous workouts. I felt sick. After the day after, especially the 2 days after, you can be very sore, especially if you haven't trained those muscles in a while. You're very sore, you hurt, but there's a level of tolerance that you have for that pain that allows you to accept that pain because it's all causing it's going to be a good result in the end because after the soreness is gone, you're stronger now. You come back, your muscles are more durable. They're more able to endure stress of that degree that you put under before. And now, because of that pain that you went through, you're now stronger. You're now closer to that goal. If you come in there and don't really give it much and just, flat throw a few weights around and all, you're not going to grow. You're not going to reach that level of perfection that you're trying to seek. Likewise with the soul. Hebrews 5, verse 8 and 9, speaking of Jesus, says, though he was a son, yet he learned obedience how? Through the things that were pleasurable? No. Through the things which he suffered, he learned obedience. Through the things which he suffered, and having been perfected, see that? Having been perfected, he became the author of eternal salvation to all those who obey him. It was because of his sufferings that he became our perfect high priest now. It perfected him in that he was showing that he endured all the temptations that we go through. Hebrews 4:15. He knows what it's like to go through all the temptations that we face. Yet he did it without sinning. And because of that, it perfected him. He became our perfect mediator in doing those things. And it's the same thing with us, brethren. If we're going to grow and become stronger spiritually, there's going to have to be some hardships we have to face because That shows true love. When you do something that is very difficult to do, but you do it because you love the person that you're doing it for. See, I heard a brother give this illustration. If you tell your child, like Sean, if he told Maya to go into her bedroom and eat that bowl of ice cream, I want you to do that because I told you. And she's like, sure, Daddy. She runs off and she, gobbles it up. Did she really do it because Daddy told her to? Or could she also have no problem doing it because, this is something that's pleasurable, it's something I want to do? It would be no problem doing something like that. But now if he told her to do something, Maya, I want you to, put up your toys now. Go put your toys away. And she's like, but Daddy, he's like, Maya, I want you to put your toys away. She's like, okay. And she did them anyway. That there was something that wasn't really fun for her to do. She didn't really enjoy putting her toys up, but she did it because she loved her dad. And she knows her dad's her authority, and she's supposed to do what he says. It's through that kind of means that God is developing and maturing souls to be prepared for heaven. That's what this life is for. He's giving us an opportunity to demonstrate to Him that I'm willing to obey you and show my love for you by doing things that I don't necessarily want to do or may not seem so appealing, but I do them anyway because you're God. And first of all, I know I should love you and serve you. Secondly, other things as well. For fear of being lost in hell and that. But first and foremost, because God is who He is. And like you said, we're commanded to love Him. And He gives us this opportunity now to demonstrate and to choose whether or not we're going to show Him that we really love Him. So sometimes pain is required in order for us to gain. James says in James chapter 1, count all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces what? Patience. Romans 5 says that tribulation will lead to perseverance, and perseverance to character. It's through that kind of those hardships that we become more mature spiritually. Just like the bodybuilder, it's through hardship, it's through pain, it's through discomfort that he matures his body and makes it more prepared and more close to that perfect goal that he's looking for. Number 3, we have proper diet so far. Number 2 is no pain, no gain. Number 3, always utilize core exercises. Always utilize core exercises or stick to the basics. Any bodybuilder will tell you that most of them, now of course there's exceptions to this, but most men who are successful in this will tell you that there are basic exercises you always want to incorporate into your training. Usually those are like bench pressing, squats, deadlifts, military press. Those 4 basically are your 4 key exercises. You don't ever want to just shove them off the table. You always want to have them somewhere in your training, because those are the foundations that will give you the basis of what you're trying to build on. They will help you to overall give you the math, so to speak, and then other fine-tuning exercises will help you trim it down better. But they'll tell you don't ever leave these basics because you need them. And you'll never get to where you're trying to go if you leave these out. The Bible teaches the same thing about the Christian too. If we're going to grow as Christians, we don't ever need to leave the basics. You have to stick to fundamental principles. I know we know there's one church. I know baptism is essential for salvation, but you know what? That doesn't mean we don't ever teach on it again and we move on to what's next. You always stick to those things, because you think about it, all the division that's in amongst denominations today, what are most of our divisions about? Basics, isn't it? How to be saved. Modern day miracles. The one church. Aren't those all fundamental things? Of course, there's dispute on particulars, that are more advanced, so to speak. But the basics are the big dividing issues that are really causing all the division that we see. That's why we need to constantly harp on those things. Because if you don't, guess what? Next thing you know, you have brethren who've been in the church for years, and they forget what passages to go to teach on how to be saved. They couldn't lead someone in a Bible study, a possible convert, and then show them, here's what the Bible, here's how someone is saved, and look what they did. Or here's what the Bible teaches on how to be saved. Well, what good is a Christian if they can't teach someone how to be saved, but yet they themselves are claiming to be saved? I don't know if I want to study with a person like that. In fact, well, maybe we should kind of go to somebody else. Maybe you and I both can study with someone else. So always utilize the core exercises. Don't forget them, because it's those things that we have to have in place if we're going to progress from there on. Number 4, intensity. Intensity. Make sure that you don't have inattention while training. The bodybuilder will tell you as well that when in the gym, matter of fact, I've read in some articles before, Mr. Olympia from back in the mid-90s, a guy by the name of Dorian Yates. Y'all may have heard of that name before. He was one who, he was not a mean person, but when he went to a gym to exercise, he wouldn't like it if people came up and was talking to him, whatever, when he's trained, because he said, this is, that was his life. And while he was training, he said, this is my moment where I need to focus. I can't have you coming up and distracting me from my exercise. I need to pay attention to what I'm doing. We can talk later, whatever, but right now, I have to do this. And a lot of guys, and I've seen it before, I've been subject to myself. I've done it myself. You'll be in the gym, you'll try to exercise, but next thing you know, you're socializing. You're over here talking. You may jump back to the weights and do a set and go back and talk to the guys. Next thing you know, it's been 5-10 minutes maybe since you've done your last set, and it's like, man, I'm cooling down. I need to go back. It's like when you have that kind of consistency during the workout, that kind of inattention to your training, it's not going to benefit you at all. If you're going to grow, you need to face it seriously. And this is very important in the spiritual realm as well, because when we face temptation, when we face trials, we need to face them intensely and very, very seriously. Because that is the opportunity in which a lot of things can happen when you're in trial. There's an opportunity for you to sin and fall. There's also the opportunity, as we said a moment ago, for you to grow and be stronger. That's why there's so many people out there, like you were saying earlier, they may treat religion so lightly. They may treat the devil like he's just, a little guy who's just jabbing you for fun, whatever. Like he's playing around with you. No. This guy is out here trying to destroy your soul. The devil, he wants you to be lost with him. He knows he can't hurt God, so what does he do now? He tries to go after God's kids, God's children. So he wants your soul. And it's very serious when you do that. Turn over to Deuteronomy chapter 6. I want to read a passage that I must say, it's every time I read it, it's sobering to me, because it makes me wonder about me and about just other people in our day, about how serious we really take studying and God's Word, as far as how much we try to indulge our minds into those things. Deuteronomy 6, and look at verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. You see this? You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Look at the emphasis he's giving here on how much you should be reminding yourself of the words that I'm saying to you. Look where, basically everywhere they turn, rising up to laying down, standing up to walking, standing still, whatever, they're exposed to God's Word and His commandments. And he looks in verse 10, and here's why he gets to this point here. Here's why we should do this. It says, so it shall be when the Lord your God brings you into the land of which He swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you large and beautiful cities which you did not build, houses full of all good things which you did not fill, hewn out wells which you did not dig, vineyards and olive trees which you did not plant, when you have eaten and are full. In other words, when God's giving you all these wonderful things, and you have all these pleasures now, these blessings, He's saying, don't forget what God said. Why? Because look at verse 12. Beware lest you forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. What happens is, a lot of times, people don't take temptation seriously. They don't take it serious when things are going well for them. And they treat God lightly. They tend to forget God. They forget the Lord. They forget His commands. And they lose intensity. They lose focus. And next thing you know, they're not taking the devil seriously. They're not taking temptation very seriously. When temptation comes along, they're deceived. They stumble. They sin. And it's like, no, we need to stay focused. We need to make sure that when we're in training, that we keep our minds steadied on the things that God wants us to do. And you admit, I think there is somewhat of a tendency for people to lighten up temptation, for us to lighten up the seriousness of this life here, what we're supposed to do in this life. Oh, he's just being a little overboard with how much he's saying we need to spend time. I don't think that's true at all. We're supposed to have our minds focused always on spiritual things as far as being able to do what's right. I'm not saying, of course you got to be focused on your job at hand and all, what you're doing during the day. I understand that. But all that is under the realm of what God wants you to do. And we don't need to be losing our minds as far as our intensity in those things. Okay, let's move on here. And don't forget, y'all can ask any questions if you want. I must be making some good points if y'all ain't saying anything. Okay, there you go. Go ahead.
Chapter 6 there, that 7th verse.
Where is this?
Deuteronomy 6:7.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
If you're a parent, how important is it to teach your children the Word of God?
Oh, yeah.
Sit down, when you lie down, when you go to bed, when you rise up, you always teach them all the time.
Right.
And if you do that, good things will result. If you don't, bad things will result. And we need to do the same thing for us. We need to be aware of God's Word all the time. We sit down, we walk, we sit, we lie down, we rise up. It's so important to be aware of it all the time.
That's a big responsibility, and I'm thinking about, I got to think about that, because that's right. Well, for those of you who haven't, I'm going to mention this right quick. Kim, my wife, she couldn't be here today. She had to work, but we're expecting a child. She's 11 weeks today, so I just wanted to make announce that right quick. But bring that into what you're saying, though. I have to think about that now. I think about, this responsibility is now coming upon me where I have to now make sure my child is taught correctly. And I'm like, that's, that puts a little fear in my mind. It's like I want to make sure I'm fearful in making sure that I do this right. Because I know I'm going to be held accountable for this. Whether I do it right or wrong, I'm going to be judged on how I treat this child and make sure I teach them right. And I'm like, that's, like I said to you over there earlier, that's sobering. That makes me, that's strange. And I'm glad it's sobering because some people, they may just blow that off. And then, woe to a person who does that, But anyways, so we got so far proper diet. We got no pain, no gain. Always utilize core exercises. And then also intensity. And the 5th point here, this is very important as well. I know some people may say, what? But number 5 is proper rest. Proper rest. Anybody will tell you as well, any successful weight trainer will tell you that if you want your body to grow, you got to let it rest. Because if you're thinking about this, the gym is not the place where the body grows. The gym is actually the place where the body is torn down. When you leave the gym, you're weaker and less virile, if you would, than you were when you came in. Your body's actually weaker and more broken down now. And so what you have to do is give the proper nutrition to build, and you have to give it that time it needs for the building process to occur. And that time is rest or sleep. Now, I'm not, you can't just sit back and watch TV. You need to actually be out and resting for your body to rejuvenate and to build up again. The soul is the same way. Look over at Mark chapter 6. Mark chapter 6. And I want us to see something about what Jesus said here in Mark 6, and look at verse 30. Mark 6, verse 30, Then the apostles gathered to Jesus and told him all things, both what they had done and what they had taught. Verse 31, And he said to them, Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while. For there were many coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. Jesus obviously made time in his ministry with him and the apostles that were with him. He made time for rest. He made, and I say this with no apology, but sometimes I know also people want to say, oh, well, you just think you should just be lazy. And it's like they take the pendulum and swing it the other way. I'm not saying do that. I'm saying balance. There has to be a time where we work and evangelize and spread the gospel. But we also need time to rest as well. Because when your body is not rested, now this is very true. The body we live in this life, in this world, influences the spirit. The 5 senses that we have influence our inner man, and that causes us to respond and make decisions. And because of that, that's the decisions we make, and therefore comes our accountability. But when our body has, it tugs on us in physical ways, tiredness, hunger, things like that. Well, we let those influences make us get angry and lead us to sin sometimes. But the body obviously has its own tugs on us. And if the body is not properly rested, it tempts us to stumble. I think this is very true. I've noticed this about myself before, that when I'm very tired, a lot of people are like this. When your body's fatigued, aren't you usually a lot more irritable? You're more snappy, perhaps, with people. You're not as focused. It's harder to overcome temptation, I think, when your body's worn. And I think Jesus made a good point here when I think there's a good principle that we can learn, rather, from Mark 6:30 and 31, that there's a proper time for us to rest the body. And doing that will help the inner man to be strong and be able to focus and concentrate. I know Brother Jackson, Wayne Jackson, he said one of his favorite times to study is when he gets up in the morning. Because he said he woke up, he's fresh, awake, his mind has not been distracted by things of the day yet, and he can go right to study, and he has some of his clearest studying times in the morning. He's rested and his mind is clear. So just something to think about. And Jesus himself, when he was led into the wilderness, tempted by the devil, what was the devil tempting him to do at first? Food. Because Jesus had fasted, and the devil knew, here's an avenue through which I can get him to stumble. Because his body is hungry, and I can work through that pool of the flesh. I can try to get him to use that to sin. You see, the body needs its rest. The body needs its time to recuperate, in order that the inner man as well, not just the body, but the inner man can be strong. Otherwise, there will be no gaining of strength at all, and you'll be more tempted, what's the word I'm looking for? More susceptible, if you would, to sinning. Okay, those 5 things I got out of the way, and I want to cover last here. There's just a few more, but these are hazardous things I want to do. Of course, what we looked at just a moment ago were hazardous as well, and if you don't do them properly. But here's some hazards to avoid when training. Hazards to avoid. Number 1, plateauing. Some of you may have heard of plateauing before. What this is when a trainer, when a man is a weight training, or a woman, if they stick to the same workout over and over and over and over again, the same exact routine all the time, eventually their body adapts to that, and your body does not grow anymore, or the growth is very minimal, because your body gets used to doing that workload. That's why a lot of guys, this is interesting, my wife, when she still works for the post office, but when she was when she was a carrier out doing a route, she used to do a route in Lancaster where she would walk 10 miles a day. That was her route. And she would do it in the summer heat. And she told me at first, when she first started doing that job as a carrier, she said she was dropping weight like that. But after a while, she'd walk 10 miles in that heat, no longer losing any weight though, because her body had adapted to that routine, that type of that particular kind of endurance it had to go through. It was adapting to that. So what do you have to do? They'll tell you every 5 or 6 weeks in weight training, change your routine around. Always keep your body surprised by something new. So it has to readjust and readjust and readjust. That'll help you grow. The Bible teaches the same thing about the soul. You can't just stay on the same things all the time and expect to grow spiritually. Look at Hebrews chapter 5. Hebrews chapter 5, and this I think we can draw somewhat of that principle out of this text here. Hebrews 5, chapter 5, verse 12. The Hebrews right there says, "For though by this time," look at this, "by this time you ought to be teachers." See, that they should have been teachers at this point. By this time you ought to be teachers. You need someone to teach you again. Like seeing that implying they've already been taught these things. You need someone to teach you again the first principles of the oracles of God, and you have come to need milk and not solid food. And look at this here. Here's what we're talking about. For everyone who partakes only of milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. But solid food belongs to who? Those who are of full age. That is, and he's going to show you, here's the people who are full age. Those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. There's that word exercise again, by the way. Their senses, though, are exercised to discern both good and evil. If we don't take the time to, you learn the basics when you obey a Christian, how to be saved, the one church, proper worship, things of that nature. But you need to start, remember, there's more in the Bible than just that, though. You need to venture off. Remember, the sum of God's word is truth. We need to venture off and make sure that we start investigating into all the things God is revealing to us. Because if all those things weren't necessary for our proper growth, why would He have given them to us? But He knows that all these things are beneficial to us. And if we just always stick to the same old things, this is kind of a, in opposite of what we were saying a minute ago about making sure we, maintain the basics. But don't just stick on them only, though. You have to go from there and branch out. Start venturing off into other subjects as well, because if you don't, you plateau. The preacher, if he does not learn more and learn new things, the congregation gets stale, so to speak. That's generally true. Now, the congregation, of course, can study on their own, which they should, and help their growth in that way. But as far as the preacher goes, he needs as well to increase and constantly grow in the things that he learns, he tells them about. And then next week or whatever, he'll learn something else and study some more and tell them what more he learned. That kind of process. But if you just stay the same and never study off in other areas, if you use the same training all the time, that's it. That's all you're going to get to. So you need to avoid plateauing. Make sure that you go off into other subjects. And you can go back to the ones that you studied before. Now, I know some people like certain subjects a lot. That's fine. But just make sure you leave time for other areas as well. Secondly, as far as the hazards to avoid, sacrificing form for reps. Sacrificing form for reps. For proper muscle growth and proper stress of the muscle that you're trying to work, you have to maintain the proper technique, the proper form. Sometimes, if a guy's doing an exercise and he's getting down to, his 8th or 9th rep, and he's aiming for 12, but it's starting to get really, really hard now, and, the muscles he's working are fatiguing, they may sacrifice certain form, certain technique in order to get the weight up for another few reps. Well, when you start doing that, you really take the emphasis off the muscles being trained and put it on another part of the body. So you're really, even though you're getting the weight up a few extra reps, you're not targeting the muscles that you're trying to target now. So it kind of defeats the purpose. There's really no growth in the area you're trying to focus on. Well, a lot of people do that. Some in the church, some out there in the religious world. Joel Osteen, for example. He will sacrifice the form of doctrine. He will sacrifice the form that God has given us. Romans 6:17, you obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine to which you were delivered. Of course, in the context, he's talking specifically about the baptism there, but there's a form of doctrine overall. 2 Timothy 1:13, hold fast the pattern of sound words, which you have heard from me. Paul told Timothy. There's a pattern, there's a form of doctrine, of words that we're to follow and stick to. 1 Timothy 4:16 says that we're supposed to take heed to the doctrine and continue in it. Continue into that doctrine and continue to stay in it. Some people sacrifice that form for reps. And what I mean, reps in the weight training area is more numbers. And some people today sacrifice doctrine for numbers. They give up Bible teaching in order to get bigger crowds. I was saying Joel Osteen, for example. I heard him on The View one time. I remember Barbara Walters was on there asking him, do you say that people who are not who do not worship your gods? She said. She was taking the total neutral view and asking him, if you say that people who don't worship your God are lost, and he's like, well, people can. He wouldn't say yes or no. He was really just avoiding the issue. And another lady that was on there, she asked me, she says, but are they lost? She knew he didn't answer the question. She asked him again. But are they lost? And he would not answer the question. He was on Larry King one time and would not say that an atheist is condemned in that condition as an atheist. Now, I don't understand what a man like that is even doing with a Bible in his hand. Why doesn't he just throw it out and say, hey, I'm just going to be y'all's counselor? That's what they need to do. Because a lot of those guys are basically just counselors, really. T.D. Jakes. I mean, and they may be good in counseling, but as far as Bible teaching, fail big time. They sacrifice Bible teaching for numbers. That's what that is. Because he knows. Joel Osteen and those like him know as soon as they start drawing a line, as soon as they start drawing a circle and putting people outside that circle, they know their crowds are going to drop. Joel will no longer be the largest church in Texas or the nation, whatever. His income's going to decrease. His popularity is going to fall. He's going to receive a lot more people insulting him or antagonizing him, whatever. They know that that's coming, and they don't want that. But they're not convinced on what the Bible says. They're not really convicted of truth. Now, think of other things as well. Amongst our own brethren, we have men who have sacrificed the form of marriage, divorce, remarriage, instrumental music and worship. What's his name? Even Max Lucado and San Antonio dropped the of Christ because they said that the church, that the phrase of Christ was like a, I forgot how they said it was like a barrier or something of that nature that kept people from coming in. When it's, is that not what the Bible calls the church in Romans 16, the churches of Christ? So God was God's phraseology a barrier to his own calling? You see, that's how silly people are sometimes when they start thinking on their own. But that's what happens, though, when you sacrifice form for reps. If you do that, you won't grow. You won't be growing towards the perfection that you're trying to get to. And what's that level of perfection that we're all trying to get to? Like Christ. You're not going to be getting like Jesus spiritually if you sacrifice the doctrine. Not at all, because he obeyed completely what this doctrine says. That's exactly what he did. This is his life in words. He did exactly what this book said. That was his life. Now, the third thing was, as far as hazards to avoid, was ego training. Ego training. Some guys like to go to the gym and they like to train just to get a pump, or they like to train what some people call the nightclub muscles. They just train their chest, their arms, and their shoulders. Just something that they can throw in front of others and say, hey, look at me. And they do it for looks. They do it for they want to get a reaction out of others. That's their main goal. Not necessarily. They may want to do it for health, but their health is not the main goal. It's more or less to impress other people and get a response from the opposite sex. And that's their goal. They do it because of ego. And sometimes you see guys, Monday, the first day of the week. And this is just typical. Mondays is almost the day every guy's in there training his chest. First day of the week, fresh off the weekend, he's ready to come in and hit chest again, right away. First thing they hit on the beginning of the week. Legs is maybe dropped off to the end of the week if done at all. But because of ego, guys are always in. What do men ask when they want to know how strong you are? Hey man, how much can you bench? And if they really thought about it, lifts that involve the legs, like squatting and deadlifting, are much more powerful movements than the bench press. But they don't ever ask about that because it's ego. They know what that is. That's the thing amongst men. They want to know how strong are you up here. But see, when they do that kind of thing, it shows that they're not in it because of trying to grow their body and develop themselves for a genuine reason. It's more or less for feelings, for the response of others. And what happens is, sometimes in the realm of religion, people, amongst brethren, can exercise themselves for the sake of getting praises from men or trying to look good for others. They do it because of feeling. I go to church because I feel good there. Like the lady I was talking to yesterday at my job, I was asking her, I was asking her where she went to church and her family and all, and she was telling me, she couldn't tell me, she forgot the name of it because she said they've been looking around, and I was asking her, well, where have you gone last? Where's places you've been to lately? And she trying to remember where one of them was. And I said, what do you look for? What's the number one quality you look for in a church that you're thinking about going to see what they're about? She says, well, first I like to see, I like a place that has the presence of the Lord. I was like, okay, so what's that? And usually when people say that, that's usually an emotionally based claim. I want to go to a place there and she basically started saying, well, I know. She said, well, when I know that this is some good people here. Well, Jesus said you'll know them by their fruits. That's how you're going to know people's characters, is how they act. They say maybe, but they may not act that way. Matthew 23, Jesus condemned the hypocrisy of the Pharisees because they said that Moses' law, they spoke Moses' words, but they didn't do them. And he said, you'll know them by the fruits. And I was basically, I didn't tell her this to her face right away, but I was thinking to myself, this lady is really basing this off of how she feels. Her religion is emotionally based. It's something that she's doing for the sake of feeling, not because she's trying to find out what is the truth of this matter here. Again, remember Romans 1, the gospel is God's power to save. This book is not some sort of, it can cause emotions, but this book itself is not something that appeals to the emotion directly. This book is a book that is that's appealing to our intellect. Christianity is a religion of the mind, using your mind. Like in Acts 8 verse 30, what did Philip say to the eunuch when he's heard him reading Isaiah? What did he say to him? What's the first thing he said? Do you understand? Or he didn't say, do you feel God's presence? He didn't say that. He said, do you understand what you're reading? Because God is trying to appeal to our intellect. Of course, there's room for emotion. I agree. And I think there absolutely, to some degree should be a level of emotion. But the emotion has to be harnessed by the intellect. You can't let it just run rampant like so many people do. You have to keep your mind focused and make sure I'm doing this for the right reasons. And not for, like the guy in the gym, about for ego, for looks, for people, for the impressing of other people, for so men can praise me, that kind of thing. Now, the last thing I want to get to now, this is the 9th point overall. The 4th one under the hazards that we're going to try to avoid is, and I think this is probably the biggest downfall of most people who try to grow their bodies physically, inconsistency. Some people, they can get in the gym and work out all day long and pick a crane, pick up a bulldozer off the floor. But you know what? They're never going to grow if they don't stick to it. And I've suffered from that before. I know a lot of people, January is the best time to see this. Because January, you have all the New Year's resolution people roll into the gym. At the end of the month, gym is down to half the people that were there at the beginning. Because they're not willing to stick with it. They realize when they get in there, oh man, this is harder than I thought. I don't know if I'm willing to do this 4 or 5 days a week. Oh man, the next thing you know, they let other things just maybe deceitfully get them out of the gym and go somewhere else and do something else. That's the same way in religion today. There's inconsistencies amongst people. Like we said a moment ago, Matthew 23, verses 2 and 3, very good text to show where Jesus said, now the scribes and Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. He says, that what they say, do, but don't do as they do, because they say and do not. In other words, their hypocrisy was showing that they are people who they would say one thing and they would do another. He says, don't follow these people. Don't do what they say. These people are not heading in the right direction. Remember, he said, unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the Pharisees, you by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. I think that's Matthew 5, verse 19. So even though they were saying but not doing, their hypocrisy was partly leading to them not being even being able to enter the kingdom. James chapter 1, verses 5 through 8. Our prayer there. If any lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives to all liberally without reproach, but let him ask in faith, without any wavering, with no doubting. What happens when we ask not in faith? Well, it says, then let not him suppose he'll receive anything from God. He's like a wave of the sea, tossed and driven by every wind and all that. And it goes to show that when we live an inconsistent life, where you end up being confused, there's no solidness to your Christian walk. You won't be growing like you want to grow. Study habits, are we consistent in those? Do we study regularly every day? I'll admit I don't. Not every single day do I sit down and take 30 minutes or so and just focus on, Bible doctrine or scriptural things, Bible things. I want to. I know I should. It'd be good for me. It won't hurt for me to do that. But I know that if we're inconsistent all the time, if we have inconsistent habits and studies and methods, you're not going to grow spiritually. The body works the same way as the soul. It's the same thing. The body won't grow unless you can maintain a consistency with diet, training, rest. The soul won't grow either. Likewise, the same way. But the one good thing in the end, though, that we can all rest upon, I'll just close with this here, is this. If you turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 4, 2 Corinthians chapter 4, And I want us to look at this text in closing, because this is one of the good things. Because we looked at the parallels between the physical body and training the physical body and how it responds to certain things. And that the soul likewise shares many ways with the physical body as far as how it reacts to the way it's treated. But in 2 Corinthians 4, look at verse 16, it says, "Therefore we do not lose heart. Even though our outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is being renewed day by day." The physical body, as much as we train and take care of it, it will eventually break down. It will eventually decay when it goes to the ground, when we die. But the good thing about the soul is, when you nourish it and cherish it, it's not going to decay eventually. If you maintain your soul and keep giving it the proper diet and keep, being intense with it, like we're saying, no pain, no gain. If you keep incorporating these things, it will never fail you. Like Sean was saying earlier, some people get old and they go under the knife, and they do it in vain because the body's eventually going to beat that knife. You can't hold the body up forever. It's going to beat you. No man's going to escape death. But if we do the same thing with our body, though, with our soul, we don't have to worry about those things. So that should make us that much more, I think, ready and willing to treat the soul right, because we know it'll never fail. I can say I'm training my body like this right now, but in the years to come, I'm just going to eventually look like how my dad looks now. He's starting to get old. He's 60, and he's starting to get, he just doesn't look like he used to. It's like, well, that's discouraging. I don't have to worry about that with my soul. I can say my soul will be perfected in eternity through Christ if I just train it according to what He says. So there's a difference you can look at in the end. We look at some comparisons, but one difference that you can look at that really makes it worth the while is that the soul will not corrupt. That's what Peter says in 2 Peter 1. Incorruptible reward is what we'll be looking forward to. So I hope this has helped y'all as far as, seeing some similarities in the body and the soul, because there's a lot. And I think, God has given us His body, and that perhaps those parallels are there for us to get a better grasp as to how it is the soul develops, and the things that are required to make it develop, and the things that will break it down. So, is there any other questions, or is there any questions at this time, and I'll just go ahead and stop.
I've got one thing that you would qualify to answer. Concerning when a person's working out, bulk does not always mean strength, right?
That's right.
And I think that some congregations think that size equals strength, and that's not always the case. You can have a big congregation and be a weak congregation. It can be huge numerically,
right?
But it might be huge numerically because the preaching and the teaching is weak.
Exactly.
And
yeah, that's good.
There's not a strength there. You can have both. You can have a big congregation that is strong spiritually, but in our society, that seems to be very rare.
Yeah, and you're right. The body does work the same way, because there are big guys who are very strong, but there are also little guys who are very strong. This guy, that matter of fact, I know a gentleman who I'm definitely a lot bigger than him. I have more muscle mass, but when he was 160 pounds, he could squat 655 pounds at 160 pounds. That's incredible strength for a man of that size. I'll just say I'm 325, and I can't do that much. Nowhere near that right now. No way. But you're right. Size does not always directly relate to strength. They don't always go hand in hand. So you're right. So we should be deceived simply by the numbers of a congregation and just look at that and make an assessment. Well, they must be strong or weak because their numbers are this. That is a good point. That's true. Right. Yeah, he's consistent. Right, and that's the one thing. That's the last one we looked at too. He's consistent with it. That's good. Yeah, so that's a good point. I mean, the small, because isn't that one of the things that's offered to us a lot by sometimes the Church of Christ, you hear people say, well, y'all's numbers have dwindled down over the years, or y'all are smaller group and all that. It's like that completely harmonizes with Bible teaching concerning the faithful. I mean, you're right, my smallness might not necessarily mean that we're faithful, but it's not out of harmony with what the Bible says about who's going to be saved and about, their number being few. I said, that doesn't bother me a bit. So I don't know why they bring that. I think it shows ignorance on their part, or just a grasping for argument, really. But that has no basis whatsoever in Scripture to argue on that premise. So, good points. Thank you, guys. Anything else? If not, I'll just stop here. Sean's getting up. I guess I better stop.